Wanted to go live and talk about mold illness because I made a post about inflammation, weight gain, and mold illness, and a lot of people commented, that they wanted to know how I knew it was mold illness. Some people commented that they didn't know what mold illness was, and I promised that I would go live and talk about it. So here I am. I've been recording videos all morning for YouTube. Hey, how's it going? So I am a little bit talked out, so this may be a short video, but I felt called to talk about it right now, so I'm going to talk about it. So I made some notes because I don't want to miss anything. So first of all, what is mold illness? Mold illness is not an allergy. Mold illness is actually a chronic inflammatory response that happens from being exposed to the toxin that mold produces. So an allergy is actually where you have an immune response to an allergen, something that you're allergic to. And mold illness is the innate immune system. It's a little bit different. So mold is not the issue itself, it's the toxin that the mold produces, whereas with an allergy, mold itself is the issue. So mold toxins are also known as mycotoxins, and they are among the most carcinogenic substances known to man. In fact, the most carcinogenic substance known to man is a mycotoxin. I believe it's ochratoxin A. So the chronic inflammatory response happens because of the toxin, not the actual mold itself. Hi. Okay. So there is a genetic component. Since it's not an actual allergy, it's a different reaction. So this is a reaction that takes place basically on your leukocytes, and the genetic component is your human leukocyte antigen gene, so your HLA gene. This is a huge gene, and it's being studied for its role in susceptibility to all kinds of chronic illnesses. So, and even some things that aren't necessarily illnesses, like autism, which is just a difference. It's just neurodiversity. So even with autism, they found in different subsets of different gene pools, different HLA haplotypes that are more common for people that have neurodiversity or are on the spectrum. And the same thing with MS. So actual neurological disease as well, multiple sclerosis, has some HLA haplotypes that have been strongly associated with it in the research. And mold illness is no different. Mold illness has a specific HLA haplotype that's associated with it. In fact, it has several that are that are associated with it. So there is a genetic component, whereas with allergies, there's not really a genetic component. And because there's a genetic component, that means that you may react with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, aka mold illness, whereas someone else in that work or living environment doesn't have that reaction to it. So because mycotoxins are so carcinogenic, they're not going to be beneficial for anyone's health, but they may not, the other person may not develop chronic inflammatory response syndrome because they don't have the HLA haplotype that would predispose them to that sort of thing. And like all epigenetic illnesses, that gene has to be activated in order for it to cause you any problems. So you may actually have the HLA haplotype that makes you susceptible to mold illness, but you may not have mold illness. And there are different things that can activate genes, you know, just like any epigenetic thing. Oh, thanks for the love. So you may have activated your, problematic HLA haplotype due to some sort of trauma, physical or emotional. So you may have lived in mold before or worked in mold before and, been fine. And then the next time you live or work in mold, you may be susceptible. So it's something that we're still researching. We actually do have tests that are kind of epigenetic in nature that can determine for sure that you have mold illness and not something else, because the symptoms are so similar to things like Lyme and multiple sclerosis. So we can actually now test enzymes to find out how that gene is basically acting within your body. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, so that makes it part of your innate immune system response, not autoimmune, not the part of your immune system that is responsible for allergies. It's innate immune system. So that is, the HLA gene is basically, thanks, it's basically the gene that determines what shape the receptors are, the receptor sites for different antigens. So if you have a particular HLA defect or a particular HLA haplotype that's not necessarily like the wild type, then your white blood cells may not be able to recognize mycotoxins appropriately. So they can't bind them and move them out of the body. So they stay recirculating, or they end up deposited in your adipose tissue. And that causes systemic inflammation. So there's a cascade of events that happens, and it has to do with your cytokines, which are, inflammatory or anti-inflammatory chemicals, just depends on what the cytokine is. It has to do with your cytokine response, and it has to do with neuropeptides. So melanocyte stimulating hormone and vasoactive intestinal peptide are both hormones that become imbalanced when you have mold illness, and that sort of kicks off the inflammatory response cascade. So that causes you to develop leaky gut, it causes you to develop other hormonal imbalances like with your sex hormones, and it causes your TGF-beta1, which is a neuroinflammatory marker, it causes that to become elevated, causes your MMP9, metallomatrix protein 9, to become elevated, and that is a marker that's associated with aortic aneurysm. So these things actually affect the integrity of your connective tissues, not only your gut lining, but even the connective tissues that make up the walls of your arteries. Oh, thanks. Thank you. So much love. I don't know what to press to give y'all love back, but I'm pressing it in my mind. So yeah, it causes a whole cascade of events, unlike what would happen with an allergy. I mean, an allergy has its own, like histamine response, but it's not the same as chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So because your toxins are stored in your fat, you will gain weight most of the time if you have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And it may seem like it happens overnight. And that is because your body knows what to do to keep the toxins from damaging your body as much as they could. So your body will upregulate your adipose tissue to store these toxins because it can't get them out of your body. So you will gain this like kind of inflammation weight almost overnight. And if you didn't change your diet, you didn't change your exercise, you're not doing anything that would affect your weight, but you have weight gain out of nowhere, then you can generally suspect hormonal imbalance or toxin exposure that caused hormonal imbalance to be a key factor in that, because your hormones control everything, and melanocyte stimulating hormone is a neuropeptide that controls a lot of stuff. So if your MSH gets low, then your VIP gets low, then your gut becomes permeable, and now you have lipopolysaccharide in your bloodstream, which is a biotoxin, it is an endotoxin, and you have biotoxins, which are mycotoxins from mold, circulating in your bloodstream and being stored in your fat. You're gonna see some issues, and they're gonna be outward issues. So let's talk about symptoms. So symptoms could be weight gain, leaky gut or otherwise, disordered digestion. It could be, yeah, domino effect, exactly. You could have leaky gut, you could have chronic diarrhea, you could have chronic constipation, you could have gastroparesis. You'll probably start getting things like eczema or psoriasis or rashes that you never had before. You could have a lot of neurological symptoms from this. So it is often misdiagnosed as multiple sclerosis or neuro-Lyme, and it's often, if you go to a doctor's office with these symptoms, they will oftentimes send you for an MRI to see if you have multiple sclerosis. And even if you don't, then you still have the symptoms, but it's just a different source, basically, or a different reaction. So depression because of the toxin load in your body, hormonal imbalance, paranoia, all kinds of weird things start happening that never happened before, and you may not be able to find the source. And even if you suspect it's mold, you may not even be able to find the mold, because a lot of times, mold is hidden. It grows in dark, damp places. So it could be in your air conditioning system. It could be, behind your walls. It could be under your carpet. Those are some really common places that you'll find mold. And a typical mold detection company may overlook it. So I had this happen before. I was living with a guy that I'd been dating for a while, and we had a mold company come out and look for mold, and they said that there wasn't any. And they did an air test, and they said the air test was in normal limits, even though the air test looked off to me. We did an ERMI, and I'll talk about that in a different video, but we did an ERMI test, and the ERMI was very high. So we had a second mold company come out, and I made them check the air conditioning system, and they found mold on the coils of the AC system. And then they found mold by the skylight. So, we've since broken up. We're still friends, and I know that he has addressed all of those things through remediation. But just a precautionary tale. I was sick from mold illness and could not prove it because the mold detection company came out and said there was no mold. Always get a second opinion. If you're sick and you can't figure it out, get a second opinion. There's probably mold there. It's actually very common. The genetic susceptibilities for mold illness are about 25% prevalence in the US population. So it doesn't mean that the gene is activated, and it doesn't mean that your environment has mold, but there's a pretty good reason to suspect mold if you have these strange symptoms and they can't be explained. Okay, other than that, mycotoxins can be stored in your body for a really, really long time. They're just like any other toxin. I was watching a documentary the other day about, I think it was Dow Chemical, and babies that were born with deformities because their moms were working around Teflon and PFOAs and other perfluorinated compounds, and they tested this boy who was born with defects. They tested him as an adult, and he still had really high levels of PFOA in his system, or something like that, some perfluorinated compound. So these toxins can stay in your system for a long time, and even if you get them out of your system, you still have to correct the hormone imbalance. That usually doesn't correct itself. So you still have to do things that increase your MSH and your VIP, and you still have to activate your self-healing mechanism, PGC1 alpha. So it's not black and white by any means, but I hope that answers some people's questions about mold illness, and I will make another video in the future where I talk about some other things related to mold illness. So anyway, I hope you'll have a happy Sunday, self-healers, and thank you so much for being a part of my life.